Thank you all for coming here today. My name is Fred Quimby, and I'm a New Durham resident, and I'm the chairman of the Milfoil Committee. But tonight we're going to give a presentation on water quality issues in the Merrymeeting River. It is completely separate from the Milfoil issue. We're actually going to be talking about something called cyanobacteria, and I'm going to lead the first half of this presentation, and then Mr. Swenson, who is selectman for the town of New Durham, is going to finish the presentation. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking primarily about cyanobacteria, something that was recognized over the last 2 years by the New Hampshire DES, and as a result of that, they posted several water bodies and precluded swimming until this bloom of cyanobacteria had passed. The people who actually were direct participants in this survey are listed on this slide. They include Bob Cravecraft, who is the director of the Lay Lakes Monitoring Program for the state of New Hampshire, and was involved in training the people here, in doing sample analysis, creating sampling maps, and making the maps of the watershed area that you see against the wall over there. Bill Millay is also a certified technician with the LLMP, did much of the sampling and record keeping. Mike Gelinas, a local resident, was trained by those two and did the bulk of the sampling, took possession of the samples, recorded the sample history, and delivered the samples to the laboratory for analysis. The analyses were run at the UNH Laboratory of Freshwater Biology, or at least those water quality tests such as phosphorus and chlorophyll A were conducted there. And Scott Kimmin, our town administrator, has helped with the PowerPoint presentation, sending out invitations corresponding with the United States Environmental Protection Agency, New Hampshire DES, and Fish and Game. I want to thank all of them for their participation. We're holding this meeting to inform residents, as well as local and state government officials, of a problem that's occurred in the last 2 years on the Merrymeeting River. And the second purpose for tonight's presentation is to begin a preparation for a meeting that's going to be held as a public session later this summer by the US EPA just on this specific issue. I'm going to begin this presentation with a general introduction to the Merrymeeting River watershed area and cyanobacteria blooms and what causes them to occur. I'll talk about the status of water quality in the New Durham segment of the Merrymeeting River. I'm going to present evidence for a point source of phosphorus introduction into the Merrymeeting River, and then we'll take a break and I'm going to answer any questions that you have on any of those issues. There will be a general discussion following the question and answer period, and during that general discussion we're going to decide how best to organize as a group of stakeholders that are interested in water quality issues on the Merrymeeting River. We'll develop a mission statement of goals for that group going forward and discuss how best to proceed both this summer while the EPA is here and in the future. Now, the Merrymeeting River watershed area includes the watershed area for Merrymeeting Lake, the watershed area in New Durham and in Alton for Downing Pond, which is located right here. And then south of Route 11, the watershed area that takes the river all the way through Alton to Lake Winnipesaukee. In total, this is 36.5 square miles, and I'm going to get into some of the specifics of the watershed area in just 1 second. As I mentioned before, it's 36.5 square miles. The area around Merrymeeting Lake is 10.7 square miles. The watershed for Downing Pond is 5.3 square miles, and about half of that is actually in the town of Alton. And then the segment that's south of Route 11 is 19.3 square miles, and that's virtually all part of Alton. What's really unique about this watershed area is the lakes and the river in between them are all enclosed in 2 towns. So our 2 towns can completely control what's going on in this watershed area. Each end of the river terminates in a pristine water body, whether it be Merrymeeting Lake or Lake Winnipesaukee. And those water bodies are a main source of tourism human recreational use, and a huge tax base to each of our two communities. In 2017, New Durham voters went to the polls and they voted to put the Merrymeeting Lake Watershed Area Overlay District under the vote and approved it as a separate overlay district to be protected forever. Now, in 2015 and again in 2016, when you looked at above the dam, at the base of Downing Pond, the water was completely green in color. And it was consistently green and turbid throughout all levels of the water column. The New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services posted this property and put it off limits for swimming and other human recreational activities, and also warned the public not to let animals drink in the water. So let me just talk for a minute about what cyanobacteria are. First of all, scientists believe that this is the oldest living organism on the earth. It's a photosynthetic bacteria. That is, it uses photons from the sun in order to generate the energy that it needs to replicate and to do everything else. It consumes water when it dies off. It consumes water oxygen as it dies off, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later in the adverse effects of that. It also produces toxins, which can be lethal for humans and for other animals. And as a matter of fact, the two species of cyanobacteria that have been identified in the Merrymeeting River here in New Durham, both are known to be toxin producers. These cyanobacteria are found in all fresh waters of New Hampshire. Generally, they lie dormant in a sediment, and until the conditions favoring their replication occur, they just sit there and nobody knows that they exist. And as I mentioned earlier, there are two species, Oscillataria and Anabaniana, that have both been isolated from New Durham segment of the Merrymeeting River, and both in the past have been shown to be toxin producers. There's much more information on the posters about these organisms after the lecture. You can look it up and get more information on that. So what does it take to cause cyanobacteria to bloom? There are three critical ingredients here. The water temperature has to reach 77 degrees Fahrenheit. Sunlight must penetrate all the way to the sediment of the water body. And there must be an adequate amount of phosphorus in the water. It turns out that among the two nutrients that cause plants and everything else to grow, phosphorus and nitrogen, the limiting feature in fresh water in New Hampshire is phosphorus. The river may be loaded with nitrogen, but it makes... The next slide talks about the way phosphorus cycles in freshwater rivers and streams, which is a little bit different than the way phosphorus cycles in lakes and ponds. Phosphorus, once it's introduced, and it could come in the form of agricultural runoff from fertilizers, it could come from lawn fertilizers, it could come from a broken septic system, it could come from a wide variety of different things. But when phosphorus is introduced, it usually is introduced in the form of phosphate. Once it gets into fresh water, it may be taken up immediately by microorganisms or by plants, and then it's incorporated into proteins as those species grow. Or it can stay free in the water, and in the case of rivers and streams, that free form of phosphorus gets pushed further and further down the stream. The last place it ends up is in the sediment, where it binds pretty tightly to the ferric form of iron. Now, an interesting thing happens during cyanobacteria blooms. Once the bloom takes place and the water fills up with this bacteria, when the phosphorus is over with and the bacteria die, they settle on the bottom. Microorganisms start to break them down, and those microorganisms consume all of the oxygen in the lower part of the water body. And then you get fish die-offs. So in many of these instances, where you've seen cyanobacteria blooms in fresh water before, they're associated with massive fish die-offs. But the most interesting part of this story is actually the part that I referred to before. When the phosphate doesn't get taken up by plants and doesn't get bound to iron, or is released from the iron, it then flows down the stream to a distant point, and it can travel miles and miles in just a few years. You'll see before the end of this presentation today that the problem that we've recognized here in New Durham now extends at least down to the Alton town line. And the cyanobacteria blooms that I showed you the first picture of in Downing Pond actually also occurred in the Merrymeeting Marsh Wildlife Management Area in 2016. And the DES went and posted that so that there was no fishing, no swimming in the Merrymeeting Marsh during that period of time also. So the big fear here is that whatever goes on, and we're hoping to be able to remediate this issue as soon as possible, but whatever goes on, this phosphate, which is found in the sediments now, has the potential to keep going further and further down the river, and it will continue to cause problems as it goes down in each one of the new areas. I'm going to talk about freshwater trophication. Trophication. These are 3 different stages that the state uses, that everybody uses, to classify freshwater bodies. It's essentially classifying water bodies based on their state of degradation or their state of productivity, which would be the opposite of degradation. There is at the top, where we have the pristine lakes of New Hampshire, oligotrophic water, which is not only pristine, but very unproductive. You don't get a lot of plant growth in that water. There are no nutrients in that water. So it ends up being of great potential benefit for human recreation and potentially even for human consumption. At the opposite end is something called eutrophic bodies. Eutrophic bodies of water are fully degraded. Sometimes they cannot even support the life of fish anymore. There are a whole variety of tests to see what stage of trophification that water body is in. I'll be going over that with you in just a minute. In between those 2 stages, waters are classified as mesotrophic, in between oligo and eutrophic. So, let me just kind of jump ahead of the game and tell you that over the last 50 years, the Merrymeeting River has degraded to the point where, at the present time, the entire segment that's found in the town of New Durham is eutrophic. And it's only a matter of time before the entire segment of river starts not supporting life anymore. And there's been multiple instances across the country where once you start to get cyanobacteria blooms, once the water is degraded to the point where it's eutrophic, it cannot support any form of life, and all human recreational activity kind of goes to pot at that point. I'm presenting the results of a study that was performed by the DES in the state of New Hampshire that involved 90 lakes. Some of those lakes were oligotrophic or pristine, some of them were mesotrophic. In fact, the majority of them were mesotrophic, and a few of them were eutrophic. And the purpose of conducting this test was to see whether or not there was any correlation between the level of phosphorus found in these water bodies and the fact that these water bodies were significantly impaired. Now, the impairment was that they had all been closed for swimming. And so they wanted to quickly look, each one of these points along this curve represent one of the 90 lakes. And they're looking at phosphorus levels on this side. I hope I'm not sending anybody away here. Looking at phosphorus levels on this side. And what you start to see is that as the phosphorus levels get up close to 10 parts per billion, you see an individual pond or lake that's severely impaired. But when the phosphorus level hits 12, from that point up, each of those water bodies were considered severely impaired and not swimmable. So the magic number for phosphorus appears to be 12 parts per billion. Sometimes 10 parts per billion can actually cause the problem, but after 12 parts per billion, all of those water bodies are equally impaired and can, in fact, undergo the same kind of cyanobacteria blooms that you saw happening in Downing Pond. Okay, the summer survey that we conducted measured a variety of things, including temperature, pH, specific conductance, color, transparency of the water, phosphorus levels, chlorophyll A levels, and alkalinity. Let me just tell you quickly here that when a water body becomes degraded and it goes from pristine to mesotrophic and then to eutrophic, there's an increase in the color from clear to brown, there is a decrease in the transparency, there is an increase in phosphorus, and there's an increase in chlorophyll. So kind of keep that in mind, because those are the things we're going to talk about for the rest of this talk. This is Downing Pond, 53 acres. It's located just north of Main Street in downtown New Durham. There's a there's a dam right here. We originally suspected, after the second cyanobacteria bloom on this lake, that the cause was a faulty septic system. So our original design was to go along the shoreline and measure as many instances as possible using a test called specific conductance, which is pretty sensitive for finding a leaking septic system. So we went along that shoreline this past summer, conducted over 50 individual tests, and the specific conductivity remained pretty much the same everywhere in that water body. And it was the same as was found in Merrymeeting Lake, completely normal, non-impaired. We then decided to conduct a variety of other tests, the most important, which was phosphorus. We selected a number of sites, which you can see, you can barely see actually. There were about 7 sites found around the sides of Downing Pond and 1 deep water site at this end of the pond, which had been surveyed by the state of New Hampshire several times before. So we had 1 site that we continued to sample where we had a lot of historical information. But suffice it to say, as we went around and measured phosphorus levels all around the lake, we found nothing terribly surprising. Every single one of them were highly elevated, including the lake water coming into the inlet of this lake, which caused us to then go up into the next pond, which is Jones Pond, and do similar testing in Jones Pond. Okay, so Jones Pond ends here. This is where Merrymeeting Road crosses over the Merrymeeting River. And now you've gone into Marsh Pond. Marsh Pond is about 15 acres. Jones Pond, by the way, was 59 acres. Now we're in Marsh Pond, and we've measured samples close to the bridge, a deep water sample, and samples up near the boat landing up here. This is a public town of New Durham boat landing. And as we made our way up here, the levels of phosphorus continued to increase. They were very high at the boat landing, which is only 100 yards from the fish hatchery. And we continued to sample in the river at where the outfalls are for the fish hatchery. And there we found the levels of phosphorus extremely high, and I'm going to present that data to you in 1 second. Actually, maybe before I leave this, let me just quickly tell you. The hatchery has 2 different discharge points. On the western side of the hatchery, there are a number of runs that primarily hold brown trout, and they have their own separate discharge right here into the river. And then the entire east side, including the pools at the bottom, have a separate discharge. It's called Outfall 2, located right here. So historically, we can go back to Marsh Pond, where the state conducted a survey in 1938, and in that deep point that I told you about on Marsh Pond, the state recorded 6 parts per million of oxygen at the deepest point, which was 8 feet. At that point, they declared that this pond was suitable as a cold water fishery. And in 1942, they actually began stocking brook trout in Marsh Pond. The hatchery, by the way, did not open until 1947. They went to the same spot in Marsh Pond in 1950 and couldn't record any oxygen at 8 feet. So just in that short period of time, this pond went from one that was suitable for stocking cold water fish to one that was not suitable for stocking cold water fish. In 1986 and 1987, the state repeated their survey, and they said that this pond was now eutrophic, and they said there was 33 to 112 parts per billion phosphorus in the water. This is 1986. Jones Pond in 1986 was classified as mesotrophic, despite the fact that it had 30 to 40 parts per billion of phosphorus in the water. And Downing Pond in 2003 and 2004 was classified as eutrophic. The state found 42 parts per billion phosphorus in the water. Interestingly, in both of those reports, this report and in this report, the state added the comment that the elevated phosphorus levels must be due to the hatchery. Now, I know you can't read this, and some of you, I hope most of you, actually have this data sheet, but I'm going to very quickly summarize it for you. Down here in the bottom is where we started the survey. This is from site 10 back to site 5 are all Downing Pond. And you can, if you look at the numbers here for phosphorus, and that's what we're measuring, phosphorus in parts per billion, you'll see the numbers range from 20s to up to 50, depending on the sampling site and the time that it was taken. If you move up from Downing Pond and move into Jones Pond had phosphorus levels in the 30 parts per billion range. Once you leave Jones Pond and you enter Marsh Pond, the numbers go up to the 40s and 50s. When you get to Site 1, which is the boat landing, the phosphorus levels now get between 30 and 60, almost 70 parts per billion. And if you move up just another 100 yards to the outfall, that is the lower of the two outflows from the hatchery, the levels are 60 to 122 parts per billion. Well, that pretty much, we think, told us the story of where the phosphorus was coming from. But before I leave the slide, let me go back to the very lowest one here. The level of phosphorus at site 11, which is on the new Durham Alton line in the marsh, was 42 parts per billion. And when I went down to look at the water there during the cyanobacteria bloom, the water was green for as far from Route 11 as you could look down the river. So let me...
Could I add just one little bit?
Yeah.
Just so everybody understands, those higher numbers, most of them came the higher numbers on the early tests came when the cyanobacteria was there. When we tested again, we did get lower numbers. So preliminary testing showed that it wasn't elevated very much at Downing's Pond. It was from the bacteria bloom when we actually tested it in the peak of the bacteria bloom. So when you saw that 50-something, that was on a windy shore that was really nasty looking, and the critters probably had a lot of the bacteria had it in it. So it kind of changes, yeah.
Sure. Thank you. So to just summarize the data here, we found no evidence for any single point source of phosphorus in Downing Pond. Remember I told you that originally we thought that there was a failed septic system? There was no evidence for that, and as a matter of fact, the low conductance readings that we got along the shoreline reinforced that observation. However, the phosphorus levels were high throughout Downing Pond, including at the inlet of Downing Pond. The highest levels of phosphorus were detected in the river immediately adjacent to the hatchery outfall 002. And one thing that I didn't actually bring up that I want to bring up now is that we took a sample at the boat landing. I think the sample was something like 42 parts per billion. And then we stirred up the sediment and collected a second sample from the exact same site. And the parts per billion went from 42 to 142 parts per billion, indicating to us that a tremendous amount of phosphorus is actually bound to the sediment at the bottom of this river. Okay, well, this is not a new situation. I did a very quick search of the literature and found at least 4 examples where fish hatcheries have been associated with exactly the same phenomenon before. And they vary in places from San Joaquin Valley in California and Colorado and the Platte River in Michigan to the Berlin State Fish Hatchery here in New Hampshire. You can see that algae, cyanobacteria, and dead fish were pretty common among all of them. And then we went to the hatchery discharge records, which are all kept by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, and they're available online for anyone to come and look at. So these are the levels of suspended solids, nitrogen, ammonia, and phosphorus, which the fish hatchery themselves has recorded with their own testing and reported to the EPA. And they're reported here for 3 different years in pounds per year. So they collected and recorded 9,483 pounds of suspended solids dumped into the river in the year 2014. 8,900 pounds of nitrogen, 2,600 pounds of ammonia, 616 pounds of phosphorus. And you can see that in 2016 it got even worse. Just so that you have some idea of what I'm talking about. 23,000 pounds of nitrogen is enough to fertilize over 100 acres of corn. So it's like dumping fertilizer into the Merrymeeting River. Now we took a look at the discharge permit that the EPA actually gave the fish hatchery. And in one section of the discharge permit, under limitations and conditions, subpart 4, there's a clause on anti-degradation. And it says under that clause, nutrients, phosphorus and nitrogen. Class B waters shall contain no phosphorus or nitrogen in such concentrations that would impair any existing or designated uses unless naturally occurring. And it goes on to say that that rule, which is a state of New Hampshire rule, says that existing discharges containing either phosphorus or nitrogen, which encourage cultural eutrophication, shall be treated to remove the phosphorus and nitrogen to ensure attainment and maintenance of the water quality standards. Let me tell you that this discharge permit that the EPA has given to the hatchery did not give any specific limitations for the discharge of nitrogen or phosphorus or total solids at all. None. So they have violated nothing except this clause. Based on the results of our summer survey, we've concluded that Marsh, Jones, and Downing Pond would all be classified as eutrophic. And we have documented that the degradation has taken place over the last 50 years. The New Durham section of the Merrymeeting River is classified as a Class B water body by the EPA and by the New Hampshire DES, which means it's suitable for swimming, fishing, and other human recreational activities, and it should support all stages of fish life cycle. Sections of this river have been submitted to closure by the DES in 2015 and 2016 as a result of both cyanobacteria blooms, and in 2016, for the first time, we realized that filamentous green algae was way overproducing in Jones Pond, and it was associated with rashes on people who tried to remove that from that water body, so swimming was essentially suspended in Jones Pond last year as well. In my discussions with various people in the DES, we were interested in taking a whole watershed view of this problem and not only looking at this one point source, but all non-point sources of possible pollution with phosphorus. Non-point sources being agricultural runoff, lawn fertilizers, things of that sort. And we were told, yeah, that's fine, but it's probably not going to be very rewarding unless you eliminate the problem that you see right now, because the levels of phosphorus coming out of the hatchery are just too high. We believe it's time now for all parties with a vested interest in maintaining water quality in this river to actually become organized. And we can discuss the best ways to go forward, working with both the Fish and Game Department, the DES, and the US EPA. I think working collaboratively with all of these organizations is in our best interest. And now I will put the lights on and answer your questions. Okay. Do I have any questions? Yes, sir.
Well, it's kind of an obvious question. kind of an obvious question. Last year, we had very low water levels, and water flow was dramatically affected. Do you think that had any influence on the elevated?
Yeah, I absolutely do think that there was something that occurred last year that may have predisposed the waterway to cyanobacteria, and that was the heat. Remember, I told you there are 3 components to making the bloom, and one of them is the water had to reach 77 degrees Fahrenheit. That happened in Downing Pond. That did not happen in Jones or Marsh Pond, which we believe is the reason why we didn't see cyanobacteria blooms everywhere. Another question.
Clean it up.
We're going to have a much greater discussion on that in just a minute, but you've got to attack this problem in multiple ways, but the primary way now is to reduce the amount of phosphorus coming out of the hatchery discharges. Then we have to look at the stuff that's in the sediment and figure out what we're going to do with that later.
Follow-up question. Is there any safe place for the discharge from the hatchery to go? I mean, is there?
Are there safe places for the discharge for the hatchery to go? As a matter of fact, up until just a few years ago, the stuff that the hatcheries currently, the stuff that comes out of the lagoons that the hatchery actually solidifies was spread on agricultural land as fertilizer. And I've been told it was good fertilizer. But that activity seems to have been suspended. Another question.
But I was wondering, is there a way to filter a filtration system?
The question is, can you filter this stuff out before it's discharged into the river? There are filtration systems that can be put into effect. There are also flocculation systems in which you actually add a chemical to combine this stuff and precipitate it out, and then just take the clear, non-nutrient water and dump it back into the river. Any other questions?
Could you go over what the result was with the increase in the second pipe lead, taking water out of the lake?
Okay. So what I was referring to is an infrastructure change that took place in the fish hatchery, I believe in the year 2007. They put in a new water intake pipe to provide fresh water for the hatchery. And in doing so, they set that pipe down into the thermocline of Merrymeeting Lake so that the water temperature now doesn't deviate much from 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round. So that's essentially what's going from the hatchery into the river. The other thing that happened is that intake pipe increased the flow of water through the hatchery from 1 million gallons a day to 7 million gallons a day. So there's a lot more water running through, and it's probably pushing the cold water further down the river. I suspect that those two things together may be saving Marsh and Jones Pond from having cyanobacteria blooms. Anyone else have a question?
We received a legal opinion relative from the Attorney General, maybe bringing suit. That's one question for the discharge. And second, I think it's Tom Burek that is head of the New Hampshire EPA. Is that? Oh, okay.
Not left. Clark Frizzy is now the acting.
Okay. Have we gone those rounds? Because it seems to really be, kind of a violation of state law.
Let me just quickly address the question. It does look like it's a violation of state law. We have brought this to the attention of several offices in the DES, as well as the Fish and Game. But we have primarily dealt with the EPA for the following reason. The hatchery is undergoing a new discharge permit as we speak here. It is going to be up for a 30-day public review coming this summer. New Durham is going to host a public meeting with the EPA here, probably in this very auditorium.
And Fish and Game too?
And we're going to have Fish and Game too, DES, everybody is part of it. And we want to be able to show them that the levels that the EPA currently allows the hatchery to discharge, which is anything that they want, is not suitable, and enforce the state rules.
Has anybody sat down with Fish and Game and had a meeting with them?
Yes, we've had several meetings with them.
And what's their position?
Well, the question was, what is the position of, is there anybody from Fish and Game here?
Maybe unfair. Do you want to answer that? I may be able to give a quick answer, and then you can elaborate. I think, it's unfair to say and bet Fish and Game into a corner. I think the whole idea tonight, as you'll see in the subsequent slides, is to develop a collaborative effort in which Fish and Game, State, Alton, New Durham, both select people and conservation people, et cetera, are involved in a collaborative effort to resolve the problem. I mean, I think there's a common goal, even with Fish and Game, of course, to resolve the problem. The question is, how do you do it, and how do you best do it collaboratively? And I don't want to preempt you, but I want to at least make sure you understood where we were looking at.
No, I think that was a great segue. In fact, thanks very much for coming, because as...
By the way, Jason Smith.
Sorry. Jason Smith, I'm with the Inland Fisheries Division. What I was going to say is, we're all in this room because we care about water quality and the quality of life in New Hampshire. So thanks for all for coming. Kind of to answer the question, I believe it was, what's our position on it? Well, our position is, just to reiterate kind of what Fred said, is we've been following the parameters that are laid out in the permit. Part of this process, we've been working with some of the town officials here, is you guys are preparing public comments for the permit renewal process. We're going to respect your comments. I'm not here to dispute your data. But that being said, when the permit changes to whatever those parameters may be, we're willing to step up to the plate to be in compliance. And just so everyone in this room is aware, it's probably going to take significant capital investment, and it's going to take some time to get to where probably most of the people in this room think we need to be. So just be patient with us. We're going to try to work together. We're probably work together to acquire some funding sources, but these things generally don't happen overnight. So that's kind of our position on it. And I hope I captured most of what you guys are looking for.
You did.
Parameter of the costs that would be involved,
I-
working our way towards a solution. How much money would be needed to work towards a solution?
I don't know. I think, how this process may play out is we're going to have a public meeting this summer. We're going to figure out where we're going, what funding's available. Probably the first thing is to do is find out where we need to be as far as meeting future water quality standards. Probably hire a consultant and some engineering, and that'll be the first initial large capital cost. And then they will probably come up with some sort of design, if it even feasible, to do what we need to do, and then go from there. So I'm really not in a position to speak to that.
I heard you say it was your goal to become compliant. Is that?
And if you want me to clarify?
With regards to discharge?
Well, whatever we are currently in compliance, other than
Right.
the,
So it seemed to me that if you're looking to become compliant with your NIPD's permit, okay, you first going to have to establish, parameters, okay, for something that is currently allowed, or there are no parameters, i.e. the phosphorus discharge.
Well, it can't be allowed to ruin a river.
Well, no, I understand
Doesn't
that.
matter what EPA wants, it can't be allowed to be ruining our watershed.
Well, I understand that, but I think we're talking about an organization that is driven by data as opposed to a personal assessment, okay, or a visual assessment. So that being the case, okay, if there are no parameters relative to the appropriate amount of phosphorus discharge, it would seem to me that your first goal is going to be to establish some sort of allowable phosphorus discharge.
correct. And
Okay,
that's where
now, if that's the
re-permitting
case-
process comes
Sure.
in.
And if that process takes 5 or 10 years, then we get back to the issue that was just raised. Okay? Is there any part of this process that where you would consider a cease and desist in your operation until such time those parameters are established, thereby allowing some of these water systems to start and become, self-sustaining or return to their natural state?
That's really not my decision to make. So I'm probably not in a position to answer your question.
When we have these meetings that are coming up in, is it May?
Sometime in the summer.
Sometime during the summer, will the people that will be attending those, representing the governmental organizations, be authorized and informed enough to provide an answer to those questions?
Well, let me, if I may, just comment and again chime in. I think there's basically a two-pronged approach here that we're looking at tonight. One is to make you aware of the upcoming EPA permitting process and to have the opportunity to do any public input that anyone so wishes. Perhaps equally or more important for tonight's discussion is going to be the following slides, in which we're trying to work and get together a collaborative group between the watershed area, i.e. Alton and New Durham, and begin to get a process where we can work together to resolve the problem. I mean, everybody would like a switch that could be flipped and say it's all gone, no question. Realistically, that probably can't happen no matter what. But there are certain things that should be able to be done, and if we aggressively approach it collaboratively, I think we can find some very good remedies. And I don't know.
My only concern is this process has happened over 50 years, and during that 50-year process, nobody seemed to think that that was an issue. So I'm concerned about what the future holds.
I don't think that's
Yeah,
entirely
I think
true.
that's fair.
And just for a little background is, I've been working in our state hatchery system since year 2000, so just briefly, 17 years. And just those brief 17 years, we've actually changed all our best management practices, gone to low phosphorus food, worked on more feed efficiencies, trying to mitigate these, known effects of aquaculture. So we've been kind of, working into this, bringing everything up to speed the best we can. And that's kind of where we're at. And the other thing that's kind of been a result of this process is, since last summer, try to gather as much information as we can to make an informed decision this summer, or work towards an informed decision down the road, is we've increased our frequency of sampling. We're collecting background data from the lake. So we're doing everything that we've been asked to do to try to put all these decision makers in the best position we can, that we can do the best thing moving forward.
In the overall scheme of things, how important is this fish hatchery in New Hampshire?
I'll answer it from the Durham's perspective. It's very important.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. It all depends on how passionate you are about angling, but just from a production standpoint, we raise every landlocked salmon that gets stocked in this state at that particular hatchery. We're talking Winnipesaukee, Winnisquam, all the way right up to the Connecticut lakes in those areas, so that's a big deal. And secondarily, that is our largest production facility that we have. And we stock fish out of this hatchery from the Mass border, up along the coast of Maine, all the way up into Conway, all the way over the 93. So we get about the bottom third of the state fish that all come out of that hatchery, plus our extensive landlocked salmon program that is statewide. So it has some large implications there.
I'm the guy that did most of the tests, and one of the things that really interested me, that piqued my interest the most, because I feel part of the problem is when you change your management practices, you went to vacuuming, and now I believe that's pulverizing what used to settle out close to the hatchery is pulverizing with the increased flow of only having 2 outflows instead of 10. My question would be, you're increasing your testing. I think one of the cheapest things that could happen, I'd like to see you do a little bit of testing to try dumping what you vacuum completely on land somewhere, if the EPA lets you. I don't know all the ramifications it's got to go. And do a little testing just to see if there's a simple thing that may reduce it more than we, because I work radiation nuclear plants all the time. What you don't see, you don't know if you're doing better or worse. And until it's actually tested, I don't think there's any way of knowing if that's improving the situation or it's part of the cause, because there's been a major change. I think the picture up there shows it the best. The state did a very complete inventory back in 2002, and there wasn't much growing different in Downing's Pond than what there was when I grew up there. And since then, and it's not just 1 year, it's not just, even though last year did have hardly any overflow, you're putting out 6 or 7 million gallons a day constantly, so there is a flow through there. It's not totally stagnant. And, but the plants have really exploded since, say, the changes took place. So something has changed. I know you lose a lot less chemicals because you have the colder water, which is good. But something has changed in the best management practices, I think, that's causing a greater problem.
But that's a great observation, just from someone with experience on the river. But unfortunately, when we started vacuuming, that was around the same time when we started monitoring. So we really don't have any baseline data to go on prior to the change of procedure. So that's something that, perhaps, as part of this renewal
Take a
permit.
month and dump the vacuum someplace else and do some tests to see if it changes you. Because I think the sediment pond is.
Fred, thank you very much for an exceptional technical presentation, background, some history, and I think it sets kind of a baseline for what we're dealing with and what we'd like to look at. There's a technical terminology that actually Fred and I have gone back and forth on, and there are two different scientific definitions and different species. In fact, one is cyanobacteria, one is algae. And the scientific technical terminology properly used is cyanobacteria. I tend to slip in to use the more perceptual terminology, oftentimes algae, so if I do that during this part of the presentation, understand that I'm saying the same things, we're saying the same things here. However, I do want to shift from the background and the technical information and some of the questions we just had to look forward a little bit and provide a concept of a framework that we hinted at as part of our discussion in response to some questions, but look at something that we might be able to do for the future. So the question is, what can we do? The pathway perhaps can be likened sometimes to a maze, and then it will take a collaboration, in my opinion, to work to a solution, to a resolution to the issue. But the goal can be achieved, in my opinion, if we work hard together and work in a collaborative fashion. So having developed that maze concept, we do have a food source of harmful cyanobacteria. Having said I was going to use that, I better go here. A potential food source of harmful cyanobacteria, algae, is identified as a potential source, as I said. We are looking to form, as we've indicated as part of the response to the questions, as part of the objective for tonight, a collaboration with objectives that we will agree on once that group is formed. I think the first step is to look at not only at the historical data, but also develop current data on testing and collections and approach it. So we have a continued observations of what that testing data is. We look at then, with that collaborative group, the mitigation strategies identified and implemented. And then our goal, as we get into the final goal for the maze, no harmful cyanobacteria or algae in Merrymeeting River and the watershed thereof. So, under that kind of scenario, we did draft a concept for a collaborative approach in which all parties come together and work, that is from the Durham, Alton, Fish and Game, perhaps some academia, UNH, the state, etc., and work towards that common goal. So, again, this is a draft. It is to be modified, revised, updated, edited once the collaborative group is formed, but from a discussion purposes point of view, we did draft the goal and objectives, some challenges and what our approach might be. The goal, as we've kind of looked at in the prior May slide, is for Merrymeeting River to be free of all harmful cyanobacteria algal species from the Durham to Alton. Where the objectives is to develop a baseline of cyanobacteria, algae concentration data in the Merrymeeting River, and mitigate the harmful cyanobacteria algae levels in Merrymeeting River. Again, looking at some technical and fiscal challenges. Funding sources is always an issue. It's something the towns and others involved will have to look at. The technical treatment constraints that are available to mitigate algae or cyanobacteria will have to be reviewed and chosen treatments appropriately. We need to develop realistic mitigation expectations. As I said, we would all like to flip a switch, have it done, call everything solved tomorrow. Realistically, that's not going to happen. So we have to look at realistic mitigation expectations, but that does not mean they can't be aggressive expectations. And then we have to develop cooperative changes from the food algae source entity, and I think we've already kind of talked a little bit about that, and understand that there'll be a collaborative effort on that. There we go. So, again, looking at potentially what we might have as expectations, if we look at year one, which would be a feasibility study, and a statement of the problem, what would be involved again. This is kind of a conceptual thing, not necessarily casting cement here. But, and again, the collaborative group would refine this and further identify. But in year one, we would look at identifying all the stakeholders, which we've begun to already with this meeting, as you know. We form the collaboration and form work groups that are appropriate. Identify the level of the problem through testing the data, through the data developed that's, from the testing. We create a database of mitigation options, and we provide town budget funding requirement suggestions to the various towns. Year 2. Thank you. We would develop mitigation strategies, tactics, and funding requirements, again, making sure the mitigation options that we've looked at, we confirm those and then start to implement them. Select the mitigation vendor, initiate chosen strategies. Develop operating procedures for the algal food source collaboratively, best practices, etc. And then communicate information to all stakeholders systematically so that all of you and all the public understands what we're doing, what the two towns are doing, the collaborative group is doing, and then what the results of that effort are. But it looks like you're going to have to maybe do that. Year 3, and it really is year 3 and 4 perhaps. So again, just quickly, year 1 we're talking 2017, year 2 2018, year 3 2019 and 20. There's nothing to say that some of these can't move up or move back, et cetera, but we'll work that based on the information that we develop within that collaboration. So in year 3 we're talking about continuation of the mitigation strategies and the tactics, and of course the funding levels, continue the testing, communicate again the results and what is going on with this initiative, and then continue the positive changes in the operating procedures as needed from the various sources. So our future vision, as we've already indicated, is that Merrymeeting River and the watershed thereof is free of all harmful algal species from Durham to Alton, and then we provide funding for ongoing systematic testing to assure the continued mitigation issues are being addressed and the results show that indeed the water quality is improving, etc. So, looking more immediately what we can do this summer, as we've indicated, the US EPA will be conducting weekly tests in the river in the spring and summer of this year. They'll be holding a public meeting, as we've talked about, in the summer during the 30-day public response period before issuing the permit for the hatchery. Hopefully the EPA will verify what we believe is the testing that's already been shown, and then once that's identified, they may identify the fish hatchery as a point source of phosphorus, which again all the data points to that, and then be able to provide us with, as I said, data that allows us to then develop mitigation strategies and further address the issue. And then we should extend ours and the EPA survey into the Merrymeeting Marsh Wildlife Management Area. That includes, again, Alton and all that area that Fred showed on the map. Other activities to be considered for this year is with the Fish and Game personnel, we could reevaluate and fully implement best practices based on what they have as their most opportunities, the most viable opportunities for best practices. And again, we can work collaboratively, make sure that everybody's communicating appropriately. We should assist the EPA and the New Hampshire Fish and Game in any way possible in terms of developing the maximum thresholds and then making sure we're testing for that. The communication is back and forth on those results, et cetera. And again, kind of what I've indicated from my point is the objective for tonight is to form a collaborative initiative to provide coordinated oversight and strategy development and implementation to achieve the goal that we've talked about. I do have a couple more slides after this, but I wanted to kind of open it up for any other questions and comments at this time.
Sorry, I'm still seeing, I'm missing, I got a disconnect between the issuance of a new discharge permit. If we're kind of acknowledging here the primary cause of the contamination is the phosphorus, but yet the phosphorus isn't a component in the determination on the issuing of the permit, the discharge permit? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, we will.
Okay, but it's not now.
It is not.
Okay. The light bulb went off, thank you.
But that doesn't believe the EPA is going to be viable. They don't like it. So how are we going to work around them?
I'm not going to address the political piece of this other than to say that the EPA does have the permitting process. They are open for public input, as we've indicated during the summer. That's our opportunity, both collectively as a collaborative group here, as well as individually, if you so chose to input whatever you would like at that point.
Swens. 3. Number 1, how many people are here from Alton? The classroom, you can raise your hands. Thank you. 2. Thank you. Yes, thank you for coming. 2, the gentleman from the fish hatchery. I didn't get your name, I'm sorry. I'm terrible on yes, Sunday, sorry. Are there any studies being made? Has our state gone to, we've seen all these other instances over the country. Has our state had any studies done on our problems? That you know.
Other than the one that was conducted by the town prior to this meeting, I would say it's been mainly data compilations.
Okay. And the third is more a comment on top of pennies, is that is if the EPA is eliminated or minimized to the point where our priority does not exist, do we have any alternatives?
Well, again, we're initially talking, and I can't answer formally your question, as you well know from that, but I think the initial point here is that we're talking EPA discussion here within a month or two. Number one. Number two is I still think that certain best management practices and other phosphorus, et cetera, levels will have to be addressed in some way for the permit to go forward. So.
Yeah, I can directly answer that question. Well, besides the fact that I don't think anybody's talking about eliminating the Clean Water Act, even if the EPA doesn't expand its mission. The answer to your question is yes. The New Hampshire DES has an equal part in enforcing the regulations for the Clean Water Act in the state of New Hampshire.
To Fred's point, the DES has an equal authority. My question is, if in 1986 they did a study and showed such high levels of phosphorus, what have they done since then?
Have any samples been taken from the actual lake, or is everything taken from below the hatchery? Years of things settling out. You know, is there a number that comes from?
Yeah, actually, Merrymeeting Lake is surveyed with 8 or 10 different tests, like the test I showed you before, every week from spring to fall in 3 different sites on the lake. And the phosphorus levels currently are running 4 to 5 parts per billion.
Is the sediment been tested?
The water has been tested above the sediment, but the sediment itself, as far as I know, has not been tested. They collect water samples at the surface and at various depths to the bottle.
The program, which said we use it straight up, and the parts per billion went through the roof. Would that be maybe an idea?
Yeah, it's a good idea. It's a good idea.
Has there been any testing done in the Merrymeeting River in Alton? No.
My wife and I moved into Durham in 1987, and we had a property on Jones Pond. And the deterioration of that has taken 30 years in our lifetime. This is a wonderful idea if you can work it out, but I'm a retired lawyer, and things that are done by committee don't get done very quickly. If it takes 30 years to reverse this, I'm not sure I'm going to be around to see the benefit of all that. So my cautionary is keep at it, keep their feet to the fire, or nothing will happen.
From what I've learned tonight, the question was raised, what is the threshold level we should be aiming for? And it sounds like the water quality in various lakes deteriorates once the phosphorus level exceeds 12. And we're talking about levels in Marsh Pond, Jones Pond, and Downing Pond of 40 and above. So I think we should leave tonight with the goal of bringing our water quality in those ponds to a level of 12s that will support fish, wildlife, swimming. Otherwise, we have a deterioration of quality of water, quality of life, and property values.
So before we leave tonight, are you looking for volunteers from Alton?
I should have had you last, because that would be a great segue to my next question. Hold that if you would.
Okay.
It would just seem to me that while the goal is to minimize the contaminants in the water, if you really want to kind of get to the source, you really want to restrict the discharges of the companies or the organizations that are affecting this. And if you affect the people that are impacting it or the organizations that are impacting it, the rest would seem to kind of follow. So it seemed to me you want to kind of focus on the source or alleged source.
That certainly is one focus point that has to be done. But I think there has to be at least one or two others, one of which is to also look at mitigation strategies of how you can accelerate returning the water to the quality level that's more acceptable. And so I think there's more than just that one point, but certainly that is key.
I've had a little over 30 years of practice in environmental engineering. I want to echo what Art just mentioned. I've seen a few situations where we've been involved in discharge permitting where things get bogged down very easily, particularly on the EPA side. So keeping feet to the fire, having a very active, intelligent perspective from the locals can be very helpful in doing that. I would also recommend that we think about trying to get a very explicit schedule out of EPA as to when the final permit will be issued.
Actually, everybody in this room right now can have a say in that if they attend the public session while the EPA is holding the public meetings here in New Durham. And we'll let everybody know. I hope on the sign-up sheet, all of you signed up, and if you have one, left an email address so that we can contact you.
My name is Ken Edwards, and I work at New Hampshire DS in the Watershed Management Bureau. I'm in charge of what's called the surface water quality assessments.
Thank you for coming, by the way, appreciate it.
I'm the guy who acts as the giant data vacuum for all the water quality data.
Is this not going? No.
There it is. Can you hear me?
Magic, yeah.
I coordinate the surface water quality assessments for the state of New Hampshire. It's non-regulatory, but I act as the giant data vacuum. So I pull in about 3 million data records, compare them against water quality standards. I think what you're doing here, the sampling is great. I would make sure that when you're working with Bob Craycraft that he submits that data, because if that data doesn't come into the state system, we have a way of processing that data and looking into the standards. We can flag those things. EPA permit writers will then look at that. I also field questions from lots of permit writers from EPA about, hey, what information do you have? And if it's in there, presumably it's been collected under the Lay Lakes monitoring program's procedures, they're going to give it a lot more weight up front. So that would be very beneficial. And was there any dissolved oxygen samples? Yeah. Sometimes the permit writers like to do a lot of modeling with dissolved oxygen, bathtub models and whatnot. That would be good to add.
It is planned
for the science behind. It seems as though I've learned, so since 1947 or 48 up to 1950, they noticed a large spike in the parts per million of the phosphorus. Is there some kind of magical tipping point that we've reached now, in 2017, where, Swens has outlined the year plan, next year plan, 3-year plan? Is there a danger, like a doomsday clock that's ticking, that if we don't act within a certain time frame, that the river will be dead?
I can't really answer that question specifically, but I can tell you that in other environments, like for instance Platte Lake in Michigan, they actually took the Michigan Department of Natural Resources to court. It took 30 years to get a court settlement. And in the 30 years, the lake, Platte Lake, went from one of the prime fisheries in the state to a completely dead lake. So it happens, but the tipping point, I can't tell you. Maybe that information is out there and we should look into it.
In terms of your measurements, they're micrograms per liter, correct? And,
Micrograms per liter or parts per billion, yeah.
Okay. And your cyanobacteria levels are at 12 parts per million, which is...
So cyanobacteria were...
For phosphorus level, I'm sorry.
Water per million organisms per milliliter. Water per million organisms per milliliter of water.
No. I'm saying for your phosphorus level for triggering is in...
Anything above 12 is sufficient.
Parts per million, milligrams per billion. Okay.
Sorry to monopolize this. Fred, you might be able to tell them about, there is a temporary thing that can be done if the process is moving too slowly, and that's a vacuum system. Can you explain that a little bit to the people?
Talking about the vacuum system that's currently employed as part of the best management practices in the hatchery, or removing the sediment from the river? Yeah. There are multiple approved methods for actually removing sediment that's highly contaminated from riverways. And even the state of New Hampshire has approved the use of some of them, like for instance, dredging the Cocheco River going into Great Bay. But I guess that it'd be better if I just left it there. It's possible to do it. It's expensive, but you can do it while the river is still flowing without harming anything else.
Anyone else?
Do you know of any other places that have done that? Dredging and...
Question is, any other places that have done that? Not known. So, suggestion, and we kind of worked it a little bit in part of the presentations throughout also. Formation of collaborative Merrymeeting River cyanobacteria mitigation initiative with and again, this is suggestion. There's nothing magic about the number or composition. It's only in thinking about it what might make some sense, and then it should hopefully kick off the discussion and make the formation possible here. So, working group of 9 members, 1 member each from the Durham and Alton, i.e. 2 members each line, 1 member from the select boards of each town, 1 member from the conservation committee of each town, 1 member from the Milfoil committee of each town, 1 member of Fish and Game, either state or local, with authority to initiate changes, 1 member for the Lay Lakes monitoring program, that's the testing side of it, et cetera, and 1 member from UNH with cyanobacteria-related expertise. Again, that gives some academic inputs as well. Concept, up for discussion, whatever you guys think. Any comments on that?
Well, how about a member also from the DES? That would be fine.
Okay, oops. Does it go back? There we go. Yeah, as I said, there's nothing magic about the number, but that would be fine, sure. Any other comments? Good idea, bad idea, openness? I don't want to put Alton on the spot here at all either, but if you have comments that you'd like to make, I'd be certainly open to that, so. Okay? All right, so I don't hear any negatives, Fred. I think that's a good sign, huh? So, we'd like the member names to identify. Okay, let me back this up a little bit before we even show this slide, but you can start me there. So, I recognize, and it's already been hinted at, that bureaucracy sometimes will slow things down, and that's not the intent here. The intent actually is to do the opposite, is to form the collaboration, get the initiative moving very quickly. So I recognize the time compression involved in what we're going to suggest here. But I'm suggesting that those names that we just identified in that prior slide be identified before May 1st. I don't know what your regularly scheduled selectmen meeting, conservation meetings, et cetera are, but I think that allows hopefully enough time to identify whoever you wish to be as a representative from that body. I would have Fred Quimby, who did the early part of the presentation, as the initial contact or the coordinator for this working group. So if you would have each representative member body notify Fred of the name and the contact information for that. And there's Fred's contact information on the slide. Again, these slides are available for anyone that would like them. You can just request them either through our town administrator, and we can supply them to Alton as well, if you'd like. Then hold the first meeting not later than May 12th. Again, what I said is it's a compressed timeline, but I think we want to get this thing moving before the EPA and all of that stuff works. It, I think, will be helpful to the Fish and Game as well to be part of that process so that they can work with the whole activity here. And then in your first meeting, you identify a working group, the organizational structure, develop the initial 2017 plans, and then what your expected milestones, future meeting dates, all those kinds of organizational stuff, so you do in the first meeting. Reasonable?
Reasonable.
Pardon? Somebody said so?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Again, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your interest, and we look forward to having this as a very successful collaboration.